Welcome, everyone, to this important presentation, The Reality of Sexual Violence in War, 6-month remembrance of October 7th, Hamas attacks in Israel. My name is Elise Teitelbaum. I'm a board member of Rhode Island Coalition for Israel and a member of Hadassah, Rhode Island, both the co-sponsors of today's event. Today, April 7th, marks exactly 6 months since the October 7th, 2023 terrorist attacks by Hamas on Israel. The focus of our event is specifically to recognize and condemn the sexual brutality and violence committed. In order to do so, we must first understand the intensity of these atrocities. I would like to give a special thanks to an honorary sponsor, Attorney Karen Hurwitz, and others for their generous donations. You have the opportunity to donate to this cause at any time throughout the program by clicking the link we just posted to the chat. For your information, today's event will be approximately 90 minutes. All attendees will be muted to minimize background noise, and this event will be recorded should you wish to rewatch afterwards. If you have any questions or need tech support during the event, please send a private Zoom chat or email to Maria Friedman, and her contact information is displayed in the chat. To start our program, we'll watch a 1-minute clip from Sheryl Sandberg, former COO of Meta, formerly known as Facebook, where she addressed the United Nations on this very topic.
Silence is complicity. And in the face of terror, we cannot be quiet. That is why we are all here today, to speak about unspeakable acts. On October 7th, Hamas brutally murdered 1,200 souls. And in some cases, they first raped their victims. We know this from eyewitnesses. We know this from combat paramedics. We would know this from some victims if more had been allowed to live. Maybe then one would be standing beside me right here to state something that should not need to be stated. Rape should never be used as an act of war. This truth must be upheld despite the politics of our time, because no matter what marches you are attending, what flag you are flying, what religion you practice, or if you practice none at all, there is one thing we can all agree on. There are exactly no circumstances that justify rape.
Now it is my honor to introduce the Deputy Consul General of Israel to New England, Irit Yaknis, to say a few words. In her previous diplomatic mission, she served at the Israeli Embassy in Warsaw, Poland, as the head of public diplomacy and charge d'affaires. Prior to this, Irit was based at the Israeli Embassy in Moscow with Israel's Ministry of Defense. Irit holds a BA in Middle Eastern Studies and Criminology from Bar-Ilan University. Thank you, Irit.
Thank you very much, Elise. Thank you for having me today. I will try to keep it short because I really want the people who joined today, to have a chance to hear from Nitsana and from Susan and the amazing work that they are doing. But first and foremost, I would like to say thank you to the RICI and Hadassah and all the teams that were involved in organizing this important virtual gathering, and all of you for joining today. So I really appreciate it, and I think it's crucial and vital to keep talking about this subject, especially in this time. As mentioned, we are marking today 6 months since the brutal attack of October 7th. And while international organizations throughout this time are trying to maybe ignore or deny the violence or the act or the sexual violence, which we will be addressing here today. I think it is important to have allies and partners who are still willing to be the voice, both of the men and women that those atrocities happen to them, but also to be a voice to talk about those topics. So thank you very much both for having me and addressing the issue. I think that since the war began, the war that was opposed on us, many Israeli and Jewish women or other organizations like we hear today, it had to talk for them to prove atrocities and heinous crimes that were happening those days. I can tell you that previously, both Israel, the United States, international organizations around the world stood by victims of sexual violence all across the world, whether it's teenage girls in Africa by Boko Haram, whether it's Yazidi women in the Middle East, whether it's Iranian women who are impressed by the Iranian regime, whether it's Ukrainian women during the Ukraine-Russia war, which is still going on, and they didn't demand any proofs. I can tell you that, as Elise mentioned, I was serving prior to coming to New England in Poland during the break of the Ukraine-Russia war. Israel did a lot to help Ukrainian people, and among them other women, like building field hospitals. So we were always trying to be on the right side of history. But when we needed people to stand with us and to speak for Israeli women and for Jewish women and for victims of sexual violence, I will probably continue saying women because they're the majority of the victims, but sexual violence acts are also being made against men. And we saw also evidence for that. And we needed to have brave women like Amit Susana and Moran Stella Yanai. I will try to call as many of them as I can by name because they are victims, but they don't need to be ashamed of whatever happened to them. And they needed to stand in front of TV channels and rallies and prove that they were victimized. Probably one of the most stories that was told the most, it's something in the evidence that called the story of the woman in the black dress. I don't know if you ever heard of it. There is actually a video. I wouldn't specify the atrocity that's happening, but I want to call her by name. Her name is Gal Abadou. She was a mother of 2 children who just wanted to join a party and have a night out. She was not only sexually abused, but obviously also murdered together with her husband. And there are many, many, many stories like this. I just came back from Israel from a very extended period of time. I know that the calendars show that today is April 7th, but for Israelis and Jews and Israeli communities around the world and Jewish communities around the world and women, which I feel like probably don't feel safe nowadays, it is still October 7th for us. It is still October 7th, and maybe the world or other organizations have moved on. But we haven't, and we still relive those acts daily. I can tell you that while I'm talking with you, I also have Israeli channels here open. It's something that from October 7th, it's always on the Israeli media and talked about, and Israeli specialists like Nitsana that we'll talk today are on any platform around the world to show the Israeli case. Since October 7th, we already celebrated Hanukkah and we celebrated Purim and the New Year, and we will mark Passover, which is, the holiday of freedom. I want to be very clear that none of us in the Western world, the liberal, humane, logical world won't be free until we have 133 people held in captivity by terrorist organizations. It may be happening somewhere overseas, over there, but I think it's a testimony and something for all of us to remember. Some of the people there, women, endure sexual violence every day, hourly, from the testimonies that we heard from the people who were saved and are back home. But some of them are enslaved practically, like we heard of the cases of Liri Elbag. She is only 19 years old, but the testimonies that we heard of what is happening to her and the other people in captivity are horrible, are horrifying. And I think that we may have a battlefield on our hands in Israel and the border with Gaza and in Gaza, but there is also a battlefield on the international arena. There are battlefields here across campuses in the United States of this topic being addressed the way it is. There is a lot for us to do. I think since October 7th, we are all living in a pivotal historical point in history. And people in, I don't know, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years will probably ask all of us, what did we do? How did we act? What did we leave behind? And I think, and I hope that all of us will live in peace with, the acts and the voices that we put out there to the world. So I think I want to thank you for this is one of them. And I think that is very important. On a personal note, I would say, as I said, I was serving in Poland for a few years. And a lot of was done about Holocaust remembrance, obviously. And a lot of big emphasis was put on things and honoring righteous among the nations. It's people that in a critical point in the world's darkest hours of, different centuries needed to make a choice to put their own lives at risk, to put their families' lives at risk, and make difficult decisions. I can tell you that being, educated in the Israeli educational system, you learn a lot about the Holocaust. I'm a granddaughter of Holocaust survivors, which some of them still live with us today. So I wish them, much health. But you always get asked during, schools or watching movies, what would you do if you lived at that time? And we never had to face, answering that question. You will say, oh, it's hypothetical. It can't happen to us again. It's something that we needed to answer. Some people needed to answer that question on October 7th. Unfortunately, again, on a personal note, from what I can see, we don't have people making those tough decisions now in the Gaza Strip and acting bravely to be on the right side of history. I want to thank you for, I know that part of this virtual event today is not just listening to the experts, but also a call for action. So I want to thank you for, being active on it, keeping those voices alive, and being on the right side of history. So thank you very much. Thank you for having me, and thank you for your time.
Well, thank you, Irit. Now the president of the Rhode Island Coalition for Israel will say a few words.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. The Rhode Island Coalition for Israel, referred to as RICI, RICI, is a grassroots nonprofit Jewish and Christian organization. It is the only pro-Israel Jewish Christian organization in Rhode Island, actively working together against Jew hatred called anti-Semitism. We stand together in our Judeo-Christian values and our unshakable belief that the Jewish people have a right to exist and be safe and secure in their homeland, Israel. As you listen, please keep in mind that the use of rape and sexual violence is a war crime, recognized as a direct violation of the international rules of war. Not to mention, it is unacceptable in any situation. Thank you for attending this important program. Back to you, Elise.
Thank you, Mary. We will now watch a short clip to recap an important campaign that was organized by Hadassah called End the Silence. Immediately after the clip, we'll hear a few words from Yardena Winkler, president of Hadassah, Rhode Island.
Hear me.
Hear me.
Hear me.
The sexual violence and terrorism committed by Hamas on October 7 is sheer barbarism.
I've learned things that few people know. Women were shot repeatedly in their eyes, heads, breasts, and genitalia.
Women were gang raped.
Some of the women I examined were beheaded.
Some murdered mid-rape.
Families were burnt alive.
But we at Hadassah know for a fact that this was planned, filmed, and celebrated by Hamas.
Please hear me, because those who were murdered cannot speak for themselves.
Help end the silence.
Hadassah, the world's leading Jewish women's organization, is making noise.
End the silence on sexual violence.
End the silence. I have the sign too.
I have it also.
Shalom, everyone. My name is Yardena Kapach-Winkler, Hadassah, Rhode Island president. Thank you to the Rhode Island Coalition for Israel, RIKI, where Jews and Christians unite for Israel, for organizing this important event and for inviting our special keynote speakers, Nitsana Darshan-Leitner and Susan Seeley. Thank you all for participating. And the silence has actually been Hadassah's message since its founding more than a century ago in 1912, when it sent the first 2 nurses to treat rampant diseases in pre-state Israel and first introduced pasteurized milk to Arab and Jewish mothers and families. Hadassah, the women's first and largest Zionist organization of America, has always prioritized issues concerning the welfare of women and families, regardless of religion or ethnic identity. Hadassah Hospital's patients that reach 1 million each year are at least 50% Arabs and represent all religions, treating and caring for Jews, Muslims, Christians, and others equally. That is why the religious war of October 7 waged against the Jews in Israel and the sexual violence used as a weapon of war against Jewish women are especially disturbing and appalling for Hadassah. Equally disturbing has been the silence, skepticism, and denial of feminist organizations around the world and in the UN, who for many months were oblivious to the murdering and suffering of Jewish women on October 7 and those in captivity, while being very vocal about other women suffering around the world. So let's be clear, rape and sexual violence are not resistance. Please join Hadassah for another petition campaign that starts tomorrow, April 8th until Passover, April 22nd. Our last petition reached the UN with over 130,000 signatures. Simply Google "End the Silence Hadassah" and sign. Thank you all for showing your support. End the silence.
Thank you so much, Mary and Yardena. Before we hand it over to our first speaker, we would like to collectively take a moment of silence to commemorate the victims and survivors of these brutal acts. Let's do that together now. Our first keynote speaker has an introductory video that she would like to share with us. Nitsana Darshan-Leitner is the founder and president of the Shurat HaDin Israel Law Center. She is an Israeli attorney, a leader in the legal fight against Israel's enemies, and a frequent commentator about legal matters in Israel. The Jerusalem Post has acclaimed her as one of the 50 most influential Jews in the world.
Where are the women rights organizations? Where is the Me Too movement? Where are you when Israeli women were raped and slaughtered by Hamas terrorists? Where are you while Israeli girls are kept hostages, tortured and sexually abused by subhuman animals? How come you haven't spoken even a word? Is it okay with you to rape Jews? Is that what you're saying? Because we hear you all the time. All but now. Almost 3 weeks since the horrific program occurred, women and children were brutally raped by Hamas, some of them so sadistically that their bones were broken. Young girls and elderly women were murdered and burned alive. Others were taken to Gaza to be gang raped on the streets and in military bunkers. Images of bleeding women being paraded through Gaza as captives were broadcast worldwide. And nothing, not a word from you. No condemnation, not a call to release the women and children. Rape has been recognized as an insidious war crime. It is a horrific criminal weapon that tries to serve a political objective. The Geneva Convention specifically provides that
women shall be especially protected against any attack on their honor, in particular against rape or any form of indecent assault.
why do you believe that this international law you constantly wave in our faces should not apply in this case? Why do you believe that international tribunals are merely a weapon to punish Israel, but in no way should be used to safeguard Israeli? There is no taking sides in this. This is pure evil. This is inhuman. It's rape. It's a war crime. When you stood for women's rights, you made a change. You exposed, hunted down, shamed, and prosecuted the perpetrators of rape and sexual violence in your countries. But you now choose to sit idly because it involves Jewish girls and women. There is only one word to describe it: anti-Semitic hypocrisy.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for this special event, 6 months into the war in Gaza. I'm honored to speak to this group again, especially tonight. On October 7th, a second Holocaust occurred in Israel. 1,200 people were massacred. More than 250 people were taken hostages into Gaza. 133 of them are still there. Shurat HaDin was called immediately to join the war. Shurat HaDin was in touch with the security services in Israel since its inception. In previous times, I spoke about it, but I'll give you a short brief about what our organization does. We actually started as private lawyers in the beginning of the second Intifada. I finished law school, the Intifada broke out. Blood was spilled on the street of Jerusalem, of Tel Aviv. Buses were blown up. People getting killed on a daily basis, and we decided that as lawyers, we can take a role in the war against terrorism by doing what lawyers do best: go after the pocketbooks of the terror organizations. Nobody believed it could work. Nobody believed you can actually pursue a terror organization, get a judgment, and take his assets and get the victims paid. But we were determined to fight back. We are determined that nobody will kill a Jew and go without pay. So we filed this lawsuit against the terror organizations and countries sponsor terrorism in Israel and the United States. And after 2 years, we started winning in court. We got judgments, we got liens, we collected money on behalf of the victims. So we were approached by a secret unit in the Mossad called Harpoon, that its goal was also to chase terror funding. It was headed by the legendary head of the Mossad, Meir Dagan, and they came to us and say, let's collaborate. We, in our course of our operations, accumulated so many documents, so much proofs that show how the money is actually going to the hands of the Palestinian terror organizations. Use this in court. Utilize this evidence, expand your operations, and go after this terror organization. We couldn't do it as private lawyers anymore, and we established Shurat HaDin, Israel Law Center, to bring all these hundreds of cases in the world courts, together with Harpoon. Harpoon was a secret unit until we wrote a book about it, which became a bestseller. And since then, we're representing thousands of terror victims in lawsuits and legal actions against Hamas, Islamic Jihad, the PLO, the Palestinian Authority, against Iran, Syria, North Korea, against Arab banks, European banks, Chinese banks, Lebanese banks, against the social media, against Google, Twitter, Facebook, fighting terrorism in court. We are able to change the world banking system. Our cases sent a shockwave through the international banking system that no bank agreed anymore to open bank account to a designated terror organization. No bank agreed to operate in terror zones like South Lebanon or Gaza. It wasn't worth their while to be facing billions of dollars judgments. We are able to seize Iranian assets, collect them, enforce a judgment against them, and give the proceeds to the terror victims. Bank accounts in the United States, buildings. A building in Manhattan called 655th Avenue worth $700 million, owned by the Iranian government. We put a lien on it, we sold it, the proceeds are going to the terror victims. Boeing, when they signed a deal to sell 80 aircraft to Iran for $17 billion, we went to the court in Chicago, put a lien on this deal. We told the judge, we have a judgment against Iran. We are entitled to the Iranian money that will go in this deal or to the aircraft. And we are able indeed to seize hundreds of millions of dollars of Iranian assets and give them to the terror victims. We're able to achieve judgments against the Palestinian Authority, both in Israel and the United States. In the United States, we won a jury trial for $655 million. And in Israel, we won a judgment for 250 million shekels. And this judgment was paid from the tax money that Israel collects for the Palestinian Authority. We decided that there is a price for terrorism, and whoever kills a Jew must pay a very high price. And we did not end with fighting terrorism. When other threats against the state of Israel came by, like BDS, like war crime allegations, we found ourselves litigating against these instrumentalities and institutions. Airbnb, when they wanted to boycott Israel, we filed a lawsuit against them, and they backtracked from their policy, say no longer will boycott Israel. When Ben & Jerry's wanted to boycott Israel, we threatened to take their trademark and to open a company called Ben & Jerry's Judea and Samaria, because they gave up the right to their trademark. We even came up with names. Yasser Arafat and Frozen Chosen People. We are fighting on behalf of the Jewish state in the courts worldwide. And we do it with the security services in Israel. So there was no question. When October 7th happened, we were called to join the war. First, we were going after Qatar. Qatar is a sovereign state. We cannot sue Qatar, but we have to sue the Qatari foundations that give hundreds of millions of dollars to the hands of Hamas in Gaza. We have to sue the National Qatari Bank that facilitates these transactions and sends the money to Gaza. These lawsuits are brought in the United States on behalf of victims of October 7th. We're going to go after the Palestinian Authority. The Palestinian Authority gives $1 billion to Hamas in Gaza. You may say it's normal, it's okay. This money goes to pay the infrastructure in Gaza, the oil, the water, the electricity. It goes to pay the municipalities in Gaza, the health system, the education system. It's fine. Gaza may be part of the Palestinian Authority. But if you think about it, Hamas is the one that runs the government in Gaza. Hamas collects the tax money in Gaza from the residents in Gaza. Hamas is supposed to pay for all the infrastructures and the projects and the municipalities and the systems I just mentioned before. If somebody else pays for it, Hamas has now free $1 billion to divert to its military operations. And this is how they were able to build their underground city. 750 kilometers of underground tunnels, sophisticated, more than one. You can drive a truck inside them. This is how they were able to locally manufacture tens of thousands of missiles and rockets and shoot them on a daily basis over Israel. This is how they were able to import all their explosive and weapons and become an industry of death and blow it all on us on October 7th. So if you want to dismantle Hamas, if you want to destroy it completely, we must stop this flow of the money coming from the Palestinian Authority and elsewhere. And this is our goal in Shurat HaDin. We also filed a lawsuit against the Red Cross. When Hamas kidnapped these hostages, nobody knew how many of them they kidnapped. Nobody knew their situation. We knew that some of them were severely injured. We didn't know if they are alive or not. We demanded the Red Cross to go and visit the hostages, but the Red Cross refused. So we sued them in court. Because the Red Cross has a legal obligation to go and visit prisoners from both sides in any armed conflict. He did it with Boko Haram when they kidnapped the 150 girls. He did it in Afghanistan. He did it in Colombia. He always facing terror organizations, not sovereign states. And yet, it's able to go and help the prisoners from both sides. But when it comes to Jews, they refuse. Already from the Holocaust, the Red Cross refused to go and visit the Jews in the concentration camps. We saw it as an internal German problem. Today, there is apology on their website saying it was a mistake not to go and visit the Jews in the concentration camp. They regret not doing it. I don't want to open their website in a couple of years and see a regret and apology that they did not go and visit the hostages that are kept in captivity now by the hands of Hamas. The Red Cross has to fulfill its obligation because we know what the hostages are going through every day, every hour in the hands of Hamas. We sued UNRWA. UNRWA, that in October 7 sent 450 of its employees to go and participate in the massacre. They raped, they murdered, they mutilated, they beheaded, they burned people alive, they kidnapped. A doctor and a teacher of UNRWA were found keeping hostages in their houses. In UNRWA's facilities, in their kindergarten, in the schools, in their medical clinics, the IDF found missiles and rockets and launchers. They found entrance to underground tunnels. In the headquarters of UNRWA, the IDF found the servers of Hamas. Now, the head of UNRWA said he didn't know. He just simply didn't know. But it makes some noise to dig an underground tunnel underneath your headquarters, doesn't it? You know that half of your employees are affiliated with Hamas. You know that you pay salary for 10% of your employees, which are actually Hamas terrorists. UNRWA on October 7 became Hamas. There is no difference between them. And therefore, they have to pay for the victims of October 7. We demanded the defense ministry in Israel to declare UNRWA as a terror organization. We brought an injunction against the United States to defund UNRWA. The United States is the largest funder of UNRWA. They paid them $4 billion so far. Just last year, $422 million. Without United States, UNRWA will shut down, and this is our goal, to shut down UNRWA. UNRWA, which was established in 1948, supposedly to help the refugees that ran from Israel to get established, betrayed its duty. They buried them in concentration camps, and they told them, don't dare to integrate in the society where you are. Don't dare to marry the other people. Don't get to go and get work permits to work there. Stay refugees. Why? Because there will be one day that you, the Arab population that fled from Israel in 1948, will go back to your homes, to your houses, Tel Aviv, Akko, and Haifa. But in order to exercise your right, you have to stay refugee. You and your children and your great-children and your great-grandchildren. So now there are 6 million refugees. We want to start a new page after October 7th. And if you want to re-educate the Palestinians in Gaza and Judea and Samaria, we have to dismantle UNRWA. We filed a lawsuit against Harvard University. But I'm here today to talk to you about what we did in the International Criminal Court. Because one of the weapons that Hamas is utilizing now, after October 7, is the legal front. They use South Africa as their legal arm, and South Africa went to the International Court of Justice and filed a war crime complaint against Israel and filed a complaint to recognize Israel as committing genocide. Israel defending itself in the court, and luckily did not get a judgment declaring that it was involved with act of genocide. But that's not enough. Israel has to hit back against South Africa, hit back against Hamas. Israel is afraid of doing it. And this is why we, in Shurat HaDin, jump in. We cannot go to the High Court of Justice. It's only for states. But we do go to the International Criminal Court because there is a place for non-for-profits. Shurat HaDin was doing it for years. Since 2015, we find ourselves in the International Criminal Court filing war crime complaints against the heads of the Palestinian Authority, the heads of the PLO, the heads of Hamas. Today, we are going again. And we are filing a war crime complaint against the leaders of Hamas, against Yasser Sinwar, against Khaled Mashal, against Ismail Haniyeh and Muhammad Deb. But not for the acts of murder they committed in October 7. Not for the acts of mutilating, beheading, dismembering, burning people alive. But for one and only one act of rape. Rape and sexual violence have always occurred during armed conflicts historically. Foreign soldiers invading other countries have always made the female population vulnerable. The difference on October 7th was that the rape was actually pursued as a deliberate strategy, an intentional tactic to terrorize, to destroy the victims, and to humiliate the Israeli population. From the plans for the attack that captured terrorists head on their persons, and from other intercepted evidence, the IDF has concluded that the Hamas terrorists were trained and instructed to capture women and young girls and rape them, brutally carrying out acts of sexual violence against them. I'm going to say some tough words, and I apologize in advance, but I must say In some instances, the attackers acted with such violence that they left their victim's body and with broken pelvic bones. They wanted to inflict horrific pain and suffering. The attacks were accompanied by threats with weapons. All the rapes were carried out by multiple terrorists and frequently in front of excited and screaming mobs. In some horrific instances, the terrorists made family members witness the attacks to increase the victims and the families' humiliation and pain. They frequently just shot the victims to death after the assault or beat them to death with blunt instruments. We learned it all from the Zaka people, from the first respondent, from the witnesses. At the Nova Festival, the terrorists chased women as they tried to flee. When they caught them, they grabbed them by their hair while the victims screamed. Many of the women had their naked bodies tied to trees. The action targeted men and women alike. Interviews afterwards revealed that the terrorists engaged in sadistic practice to increase the pain. There are videotapes of women having their bodies mutilated by the terrorists with knives. The terrorists, I'm sorry, but the terrorists sliced their breasts and sexual organs. Many times the bodies of the rape victims of witnesses were incinerated with flammable material, and by fire. We found the evidence. When the IDF went and entered the houses in the Nova Festival, they found burning fluid material come with them. Even after they killed the women, they further desecrated the bodies. Many of the bodies were found naked and handcuffed with the clothes having been cut off of them. Others were found strapped and tied to the trees. The IDF has captured some terrorists with videos of these atrocities on their phones. Other terrorists confessed to carrying out these rapes and mutilations. You know, a military officer at one of the bases who escaped the October 7 attack testified that she personally saw at least 10 bodies of female soldiers who had been raped and left dead without clothes. Why did they do it? Why did Hamas do this brutal act of rape? Hamas brought to the world a lot of terror innovations. Suicide bombing, you know, the cult of death, arming their civilians with explosive vests and blowing themselves up on Israeli buses. Hamas taught the world how to fire their locally made rockets from Gaza civilians' neighborhoods, from kindergarten, mosques, and hospital, and hoping that the IDF would retaliate and kill their own civilians. But this time, Hamas comes and brings a new innovation to the world. The use of intentional rape and sexual assaults against Israelis as a deliberate act of terrorism, as an intentional weapon of war to scare and humiliate the world Jewish community. And how did the world respond? Completely silence. Silence from the UN and the international human rights groups, from the women group and the feminist group and the Me Too movements. You see, after the genocide in Rwanda, after the war in Kosovo, when there were large number of rapes, rapes carried out randomly, not as a deliberate tactics of their attacks. The international community decided that they would no longer tolerate rapes during war crimes. They convened all the international lawyers and women's groups and passed mountains of resolutions and proclamations. The UN and other international forums proposed many treaties and conventions. Local and national governments got involved, passing legislation and declaring that the rape and sexual violence is unacceptable, that it won't be tolerated in any level. The legal community, remember this, the legal community swung into action and they wrote law reviews, articles about rape, they drafted legislation, they held conferences. Perhaps no other issue in the world received this time of global response. When the Boko Haram in Africa kidnapped those high school girls, no other than American First Lady Michelle Obama led the global campaign to get the girls back. When ISIS started raping women and capturing Yazidi girls as sex slaves, the world united to stop this outrage and the UN mobilized to save the women. The international community decided that they would no longer permit women to be sexually assaulted during wartime. Zero tolerance for rape. But when it happened on October 7th, all these promises and vows and commitments disappeared. When Israeli girls were captured and assaulted, suddenly the silence was defaming for us. Well, we in Shurat HaDin will not allow this to happen, will not allow it to be swept under the rug or to be ignored. We won't agree to allow this outrage to disappear. We won't allow the Jewish community to be victims or to suffer this humiliation without fighting back. This is why we're going to the international court. And this is why we're going to the Israeli courts. Israel now is facing a huge problem of how to indict the terrorists that they captured on October 7th. You can't connect between individual to an act of murder. There were no evidence. There are no forensic evidence. Israel did not treat this scene as a crime scene. We were rushing to bury our dead, not to collect evidence with yellow stripes. And yet, there are thousands of terrorists detained by Israel that have to be brought to justice. And they all have to be indicted and convicted, not only for murder, not only for mutilating, not for only burning people alive, but for raping. There is a way to do it. And in Shurat HaDin, we are introducing this legal way to the authorities in Israel. It's called conspiracy for crime. Because all these terrorists were told what to do. They came with written instructions, what act to take when they enter Israel. They were instructed to kill, to mutilate, to burn, and to rape. If you are part of this plan, you are to be charged each and act of murder. We are fighting back. And I call upon all the Jewish community, join us in. Israel will prevail. No doubt about it, no question. We're gonna fight this war and win it. Because this time, we are not gonna remain victims. In the Inquisition, we are forced to change our religion. On the pogroms, we were forced to run for our life. In the Holocaust, we were brought and were slaughtered. But we prevailed. We established a state. We built up a sovereign country. And yet we were chased and fought and murdered and killed. But this time, we promised to fight back. We promised never again. And we'll fulfill this promise. We'll make sure that it will not happen again. We are fighting back. We have to prevail. We have to have our state, the Jewish state, standing up. The Jewish people have been through atrocities for generations. We'll overcome this one. And indeed, after October 7th, the entire Jewish community unified. Before October 7th, Israel was on the verge of civil war. But when we were hit so hard, we unified. Everybody went into the battlefield and fought back. I promise you, Israel will win this war and will accomplish the two goals that we owe to do. We'll dismantle Hamas and will bring back the hostage. Thank you very much.
Nitsana, thank you. Just take a moment to introduce our next keynote speaker. Susan Seeley is the National Executive Director of Na'amat USA. The parent organization, Na'amat, is the largest women's organization in Israel that serves women, children, and families in Israel. She has over 20 years of experience in leading and managing various initiatives in the fields of international trade, education, politics, and conflict transformation. She just got back from a trip to Israel and has a lot to share. Susan, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. And Nitsana, just kol hakavod on the really important work. We're all appreciative. And the way you brought it to life, brought it to just to our kishkas. I want to say for everybody, it's something that we're all carrying around in our kishkas, and it's made life feel fragile, feel beautiful. However people are commemorating, I know that people are gathering in person at demonstrations or rallies or kind of teach-ins like this one to commemorate today's awful 6-month marking. And I want to give great appreciation to the IRCI and Hadassah and Elise and Maria and Yardena and the people who are involved in organizing this to give us this opportunity to gather in community and to share this anxiety and share this grief. Nitsana and Shurat HaDin are doing, I have to say, it gives me like a little bit of hopefulness and pride. And so you're carrying all of that with you on your shoulders as we go forward into kind of what will be, but to know that organizations like yours are doing the work in the trenches, as it were. My presentation is going to give a little bit of more prosaic context to what Nitsana shared. Na'amat USA, like Hadassah and other women's organizations, we are not in the trenches in the same way Shurat HaDin is, but we are representing and supporting the women who are experiencing this for themselves in Israel. So I want to just start briefly. I was just with our sisters from Hadassah. I was with Carol Ann Schwartz. Whoops, let me go back to share my screen and do that. Okay, sorry, let me share. Make sure you can see that. Elise, I see you. Can you give a thumbs up that you see my screen? Okay. Great, thank you. So I was with Caroline Schwartz and some other Hadassah representatives when I was in Israel. And we all went, we went to the Nova Festival site. We went to near Oz. We spoke and heard from the members of the security cabinet, the war cabinet. We spoke with people who are monitoring, women actually, who are monitoring the situation on the northern border. And it's all very, very fraught and very fragile, as I said. So with that, let me get into, again, some of the context I want to say for what Nitsana was sharing with us. Our organization, Na'amat USA, similarly to Hadassah, we're 100 years old. We're in Israel. It's the largest women's organization in Israel. And as Yardena was sharing, we also serve Arabs, Jews, Druze, Christians, whomever come to participate in our programs and take advantage of our services and our facilities. We in good days are here. You can see the map to the right. We are in all of these locations from the very south to the very north. This is kind of in better days before October 7th. There are some of our scholarships. Here's one of our extended care daycare centers. This is women from Na'amat who are advocating for women's rights legislation in myriad ways. And then these are some of our, this is one of our youth villages in the agricultural program. And then, of course, since the war, oh, this woman. Whoops, sorry. So I wanted to just stop her and go back. This is mobile bomb shelters, of course, that are needed now, unfortunately, for some of our facilities that didn't have large enough capacity. So our emergency fund has been funding some bomb shelters. Here are students who were displaced from their classrooms that were closer to the war. We had 3 of our facilities in Sderot affected, our Ayanot Youth Village. You all are familiar with the disruption to life that the beneficiaries and the participants in Na'amat have had to put up with as well and have suffered. We housed displaced families in our youth villages. We've been working with women traumatized by the war at our Meshinot Center in Jerusalem. And then, of course, we've been supporting our IDF soldiers with specifically with needs that are specific to the women soldiers, and then also meals and the like. So to go on. So here, I mean, I liked how Mary brought up, the fact, and Nitsana, of course, is talking about rape and wartime, and it's unacceptable. But that's a relatively newer understanding to us. It's a logical and horrific understanding. But in World War II, say, the recognition that sexual crimes as well as rape went on was just that was the spoils of war. That was how war was conducted up and until as recently as World War II. And in neither of the criminal tribunal courts that were established then was it brought up in Tokyo or Nuremberg courts. It wasn't prosecuted as a war crime. So unfortunately, the history that Nitsana is working with in the criminal courts and all, that's all very recent legal precedent. So again, this is what Nitsana is working with. Many of you are familiar with the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women that was adopted by the UN. And as much as we are challenged by the UN as supporters of Israel and have come to mistrust their rulings and reliability, it is still the international body on record as having international laws and obligations and responsibilities and treaties and the other kind of legal vehicles to which people can turn for any kind of accountability. So the CEDAW Convention was seen as an international Bill of Rights for women. You see their definition of discrimination against women. This was all very new in 1979. It was kind of new and astounding that they got together and did this. This was born out of the Commission of Status of Women that had been in existence through the 50s and 60s. And so CEDAW in 1979 didn't specifically call out gender-based violence against women, this GBVAW, but then it was updated in 2017. And here you can see that among many other things, they really doubled down on calling out gender-based violence against women and girls as violations of sexual and reproductive health rights. It stressed the need to change social norms and stereotypes that support violence against women, which we are still in need of in our societies, right? There's in media, in what we consume in the for entertainment, still has kind of we still have a social norm and stereotype that allows for people to perpetrate violence against women. So these are still works in progress. So, and it calls for the repeal of all laws and policies that directly and indirectly excuse, condone, and facilitate violence. So even those states that did not ratify CEDAW are required by international human rights law to protect women from gender-based violence against women. What, let me see if I can see in the chat, take a guess which countries have not signed, have not ratified the convention. What can you guess? Does somebody want to put in the chat what they think? Let me see if I can see it. Give me like 3 countries. 1 country, but there are 7 that haven't. Okay, we see Russia. I'm sure Nitsana knows the answer to this. And it's a glaring one. Iran. Okay, Iran, North Korea. So I'll just go, yes, Sudan, good guesses. Qatar. So, and Nitsana might have a more updated understanding about this, but it's actually, Dorothy was right, as well as, who else got a one right here? I saw somebody say, Talia said Sudan. So the US has not ratified the convention to eliminate all forms of discrimination against women and girls, which is appalling, and including Sudan, Somalia, Palau, Tonga, and Nauru. So we have some work to do. But we are held to the international rights. So now 1992 is the first time that the UN Security Council as a whole recognized the issue of gender-based violence against women, just violence against women during wartime, as the result of massive, organized, and systemic detention and rape of women, in particular Muslim women, Bosnia and Herzegovina. So in the former Yugoslavia, that was the first time it was called out as a crime that must be addressed in accordance with international statutes and crimes, international crimes. So the convention recognizes violence against women as a severe form of discrimination that gives rise to and underpins all other forms of discrimination against women. And again, I think this is notable for just in general how violence against women continues to underpin all sorts of discrimination. And it is rape, as Nitsana called out. It's rape that was used in the context in October 7th, rape and targeting women, targeting sexual violence for terror and for submission and for coming out of society as a whole, because the society as a whole feels like when its women are attacked and violated like this, then the society is terrorized as well. So also, of course, then there was the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, which came out in 2000, the year 2000, so only 24 years ago, rather. to raise awareness around the world that women are subjected to rape, domestic violence, and other forms of violence, not only in wartime, but at all times. So the UN, to its credit, is working on these things. There are myriad papers and councils and committees that work to highlight these issues. Unfortunately, as Nitsana pointed out, whoops, I think I skipped one. So yeah, what happened on October 7th when we had the instances that are vastly contraindicated by international law, by CEDAW, by all the conventions and the committees? Why was the terror of gender-based and sexual violence of Hamas different from others? Where were UN women, CEDAW members, UN women, feminists, and other allies? And here's a snapshot from that UN convening that Sheryl Sandberg helped to organize along with the Israeli government. As Nitsana referenced, and she showed in the Hadassah clip, women and people like Dr. Kochav Elkayam Levy, who started Israel's Civil Commission on October 7th, crimes by Hamas against women and children, other organizations. But Dr. Kochav is doing an extraordinary job. She was made aware of she understood right away, and Nitsana can probably say yes or no to this, that she is one of the people who right away understood the importance of getting proof, getting testimony, getting all people who had any understanding of violence that was done against women to put it all in one place. And she started collecting all that evidence and gathering it, which has been essential, again, I'm sure, for the work of Shurat HaDin and other organizations that need to have that kind of testimony and proof, along with Zaka and the IDF and all that we saw in the video and from Nitsana's testimony here. So I want to just, we heard from Sheryl Sandberg, and also in Nitsana's video about the silence of women and the silence of other allied organizations. And I'd like to just play this brief clip from the UN convening the special session to condemn the silence on Hamas's sexual violence. Hear our voices. This is Mandana Dayani. I'm sure many of you know of her. She was, I think, the last speaker, and she really was powerful in what she had to say. So let's listen.
Susan, we can't hear the audio.
Oh, you can't. Uh-oh, hold on, sorry. Let me see if I didn't click. Could you hear it before? That young woman? Oh, okay.
Our hem lengths and our hair covering, their real job.
Okay, let me back up. There it is.
The first time I had a gun pointed to my head, I was 4 years old. I was walking to the park with my mom in Tehran when the Islamic Republic's morality police pulled up alongside us. While their job was to monitor our hem lengths and our hair covering, their real job was abusing their power to deny women our rights and agency through deliberate acts of intimidation, dehumanization, and outright terror. I've never, ever forgotten the evil I saw in their eyes that morning. Even as a little girl, I knew a real-life monster when I saw one. Today, the Islamic Republic of Iran that forced me and my family out of our homeland remains as oppressive as ever. And it is the same regime that funds the terrorist group Hamas. On the morning of October 7th, Hamas brutalized, bound, burned, murdered, beheaded, and sexually assaulted young girls and women in Israel. They raped young girls at a music festival and threw their dead, naked bodies into piles on top of each other. They rape women and teenage girls with such force and mutilation that medical examiners found them with shattered pelvises and missing organs. They rape the dead bodies of women. They dragged women through the streets and paraded them as their conquests to cheering crowds. Rape was a premeditated, orchestrated, deliberate tactic of war. Monsters. As a feminist and activist, I have stood shoulder to shoulder with women my entire adult life. Women who look like me and women who don't. Together, we were the first to sign Me Too. We marched at the original women's marches. We advocated for the safe return of the girls kidnapped by Boko Haram. We joined the calls to end Asian hate and Islamophobia. We supported Black Lives Matter. We campaigned for LGBTQ rights. We spent months protesting for women life freedom. We flew to the US-Mexico border to demand the reunification of families. We fought to protect our democracy. But then, on October 7th, I suddenly found myself completely alone. The champions I had stood next to so many times through so many injustices just disappeared. I was heartbroken and abandoned. Peers, friends, universities, and fellow leaders who still remain silent. You have made the deliberate choice to look the other way. You saw the videos, you saw the photos, many recorded and live streamed by the terrorists themselves on our feeds. You know exactly what happened to these girls, and yet you turned away. You ignored our pleas to bring the hostages home. You didn't participate in our campaigns. You didn't hold signs. You didn't march, you didn't wear the t-shirts, you didn't sign the letters. When our women's mouths were bound and gagged, you chose not to be their voice. UN Women, it took you 50 days to condemn this gender-based violence and another 7 to utter a single word about the terrorists that perpetrated them. When we commit to speaking out for women and girls, that means all women and girls. When we said believe women, we meant all women. So if you ignore the very clear and obvious violation of just these innocent women and girls, or worse, when you twist propaganda to dare justify it, then you are politicizing their pain. You are denying their stories. You are stating that their rights are undeserving and that their suffering is unworthy of your protection, and you are complicit in emboldening their perpetrators who must be held to account. Showing moral leadership does not require you to just pick a team and ignore the brutal contours of the real world. Moral leadership does require you to see these women and all women. It is not your job to choose sides between them. It is your job to stand on their side.
Okay, in the interest of time, I'm going to stop there. She speaks for a few more minutes, but it was so powerful. The moral, unambiguous moment of just saying that we support all women and girls, right? So I know that we're kind of running a little bit behind schedule. So let me move on real quick. And so as a result, as you probably all know, March 4th, the special representative for the Secretary General on Sexual Violence and Conflict came out with a report, finally. When I was in Israel, we met with President Herzog, who talked about his visit with the special representative. And his wife, Michal, is very involved in that effort. And they said that they felt that it was that she heard what people had to say. She was thorough in her findings. This is the UN report, executive summary number 13. There are reasonable grounds to believe that multiple incidents of sexual violence took place with victims being subjugated to rape and or gang rape and then killed or killed while being raped. So yay, UN, you finally kind of caught up, but there's still more to be done, of course. And that's what Shurat HaDin is doing. Michal Herzog says there needs to be an inclusion of women in the important rooms that make decisions for this nation, i.e. Israel. She said, we need more women. We need more women at decision-making tables in local government and leadership. She said this as what in kind of answer to what can be done, what needs to be done going forward to make sure that these voices and these issues are raised all the time. We need more women because women know how to listen to women. As Mandana and Nitsana and so many women, we none of us, I dare say, in US at Hadassah and other organizations at IRCI and Na'amat, we were not experts in rape during wartime, sexual violence during wartime, and we've had to have become not, if not experts, well versed in it and have an understanding of why it's so important that we continue to make our voices heard, that we continue to show up in spaces and bear witness and testimony. We thought we were bearing witness to the Holocaust. We're bearing witness to acts that happened 6 months ago that are already being attempted. People are attempting to erase them from our history and from our communities and from our trauma, and not letting us live our trauma and share our trauma and have redress for our trauma and accountability for our trauma. Not to say that there isn't trauma in other communities and other places and other people and all of that. It's a this and moment, and we can't be silenced about our pain and our trauma and the fact that there are still hostages, still women being subjected to what we just heard about. That was already in December when Mandana and the UN convened that special session. That was in December. We are many months, and this is far from over and far from resolved. And I just want to say to Shurat HaDin, like, just wow, whatever we can do to support organizations like that are in the trenches doing the work on the ground, we need to do that. We need to show up. We need to go to Israel as if you've got an option to go with your organization or other organizations. Hashtag I believe Israeli women. Search that hashtag. I provided Maria with a whole list of resources, all the things that are in my slideshow and other resources that we've got. Now I've forgotten, the Hadassah campaign and the Silence campaign, sorry. And then, and a whole bunch of other resources as well. And then I just want to say thank you. And just to let you know, we do have allies, non-Jewish, non-Israeli allies. This is our next program on April 18th. All these 3 young influencers are showing up to do a panel conversation about why they're standing up loud and proud for Israel and what effect that has had on their kind of social media presence and how they're doubling down to support Israel and the voices of women in Israel now. So thank you so much. It's been an honor to be with you today and to mark this occasion amongst like-minded people, and to know that we are not alone and that we all are doing something to, help end the violence, help end the silence. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your incredibly powerful and informative presentations, Nitsana and Susan. We're going to transition now into doing some questions and answers. We have selected a few from those from attendees that submitted questions during registration. And so the first question I would like to present to both of you. Why do you think it's taken so long for the women's organizations to speak up about these sexual atrocities against the women in Israel?
I mean,
Susan?
anti-Jewish, anti-Israel bias. I mean, that's what this has all led us to, right? That our fights against anti-Semitism and I think it was Yardena who said it that way, anti-Jewish calling it anti-Semitism almost removes it a degree. Anti-Jewish, is really appropriate. I've started using that language, anti-Jewish and women. Nitsana spoke to the fact that women are subjected to violence, to sexual violence, to domestic sexual violence, and all the time. So it's this combination of not hearing voices and not hearing Jewish women's voices, Israeli voices. Nitsana, you can talk about in Israel what you think. You're muted. Oh,
she's muted.
Me? Okay, thank you. Yes, I totally agree. This is anti-Semitism. It's not a shame. It's not a bad word. It's a word we've been living through, more than I would say 3,000 years. It's just a modern way of new anti-Semitism, because you see all these organizations, all these international human rights organizations and international organizations, they side with women. They were opposed of the use of rape as weapon of crime, found themselves in a deep problem when it turned to be Jewish girls that were raped, because they don't like Jews. And this is why it took them a long time. And some of them, it will take them forever, because they will never come inside to the side of the Israeli or the Jewish girls. It's just against them. You will never hear a word from Michelle Obama. You will not. And she's, a national figure. She might be the first lady one day. And yet she decides to keep silent. It just shows you the hypocrisy of the world, and yet the anti-Semitism when it comes to Jews.
So another attendee had submitted a question asking about how Jew hatred or anti-Semitism plays into this issue, and I think that you have both addressed that in response with that. So another attendee would like to know, what can I do as an individual to support these women?
I think what we need to do is not only to support the women. Support the women is, Israel is taking care of the victims financially, psychologically, therapeutically. There are a lot of organizations in Israel that help them to try to rehabilitate their life. And I say try because, unfortunately, the chances that they will get back to their life are pretty slim, according to what they come and say. But the main thing is to expose it to the world. And the main thing is right now, in the course of the war, to buy more legitimacy to the IDF to finish the war. Because there is a tremendous pressure. I take it a little bit away from our subject, but it's a crucial subject. Israel must enter Rafah and kill the 4 other battalions of Hamas, kill Yahya Sinwar and the leaders of Hamas, and free the hostages. Israel must do that. Problem is that it faces a tremendous pressure, mainly from the world, but also from the United States, not to enter Rafah for the fear of harming civilians. There are more than 1.5 million residents, Palestinians, that fled into Rafah. In order to show the world who we are fighting, in order to show them the monster they are, we have to expose again and again the act of rape. Because right now there is a narrative, okay, the Hamas are killing children and women are torturing women and children and people in captivity, because the IDF does the same thing to the people in Gaza. They always also kill children and women and men and torturing and all that stuff. Say it. But the IDF doesn't rape. Rape is out of the equation. You come and speak about the rape, you may convince your leaders, your community to put pressure on the United States to let us finish. This is from our perspective.
Susan, did you have
So
anything
I'm
else?
sorry. So just to conclude, what you need to do is also to support people, pro-Israeli organizations, support Naaman, support Shurat HaDin, be part of this war. Don't stand on the side, be part of us. We are fighting. And as I said before, only together we will win.
Thank you. Susan, do you have something that you would like to add to that?
No, I'm looking at some of the questions if you want me to look at one of those.
I think we had one more question that we had selected, and then we'll wrap it up. What are the steps that we can take to ensure that this is reported as a criminal act, a crime against humanity?
Nitsana is definitely, that's more her lane, but let me just speak to really quickly, because Dorothy had a good question about CEDAW and like the US not signing on, they are signatories, they have not ratified it. And that is because of the dysfunction in our own government, because we have legislators who are against having us be beholden to a court outside of our own court, and feel like that we shouldn't be spending our energies and our resources in getting along with other countries in the world. So that's you know, you can look up the reasons why we are not ratifiers of it, but it's our legislators, and that if we, sorry, now I've lost my train of thought. So I'll turn it over to Nitsana. Sorry, go ahead.
Thank you. Very simple. We don't have evidence. We don't have direct evidence, but we do have testimonies. And when we come before the International Criminal Court, it's not like a real court. Okay, let's say it's a political court. We know, I take it out of the equation right now. We've been fighting in the International Criminal Court for years, and yet the court decided to open investigation against Israel. Insane, but this is what they do. It's not a real court in a sense that they can examine anything and take into consideration anything. They don't have rule of law. They don't have rule of evidence. They cannot disregard hearsay because it's hearsay. When they come and do an investigation, they interrogate everyone, they investigate everything. So the testimonies of the Zaka people, the first respondents, the IDF people, the witnesses that were lying down on the floor in the festival, hearing, seeing, witnessing what happened to their friends, to the female, and also to the male in the festival, will be sufficient to establish the rape as war crime. And if they show it was done systematically, because this is the definition of a war crime, when it was done massively and systematically, which was, then you can indict them for war crimes and you can convict them for war crimes. I wanted the Israeli authorities to indict them for war crimes, but Israel is very afraid of utilizing this international law that other nations will not charge Israel for war crimes. So we leave it aside for the Israeli authorities. They will deal with it as a local crime, murder, rape, burning, torturing, anything else. But in the International Criminal Court, they should be indicted and eventually convicted for.
Thank you both for your meaningful and thoughtful answers. I want to thank you all for joining our program today. We hope that you've been greatly inspired to take action. As a group, we have the power to end the silence. All attendees will be given a follow-up email with resources and information, links to suggested action steps, along with a link to a recording of this program. A few of the action steps that have been identified, and these are just a few of them. As I said, a compilation will be sent in the follow-up. Sign the Me Too Unless You're a Jew petition. Participate in Hadassah's The Yellow Nail Project, which submit a letter putting pressure on international organizations. And I saw in the chat that somebody had asked about a sample letter. We have created a pre-written message that you can repurpose, and we will provide the contact information of where you can send it. I also want to take a moment to say thank you for the donations that we've received so far. You will still have the opportunity to give after the event at the link provided. And we do encourage you to sign up for Rhode Island Coalition for Israel and Hadassah's email newsletters at the websites displayed in the chat. Somebody asked about the number that I'm wearing. Today is April 7th. It is on the calendar 6 months since October 7th, but it is really in effect is 183 days that our hostages have been held captive. And please do your part in helping us end the silence. Am Yisrael Chai. Thank you, everyone. This concludes our program.